Tal Heinrich is a spokesperson for the office of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Thank you so much for your time today here on DW. We do appreciate it. Now, we know that no aid has yet entered Gaza today from Egypt. Can you help us understand what is holding it up?
Thank you for having me on today, Angela. Before I address your question, let me just state that the most urgent humanitarian question that has to be addressed right now in Gaza is the state of 203 Israeli hostages who are being held there in captivity. There are babies among them, dozens of babies, toddlers, children, and a Holocaust survivor. Our elderly are there, and we want our sons and daughters back. And we urge the international community to stand with us and with our demands to back it when we say that we want the Red Cross to get access to these hostages and examine their condition. As for your question, what pertains to the Palestinian civilians in Gaza, we have certain agreements in place with our American counterparts, and we said that first, we will not allow in humanitarian aid from Israel into Gaza territory, as long as we don't get our hostages back. But we have said that we will not prevent the access of humanitarian aid that will come into Gaza from Egypt. As you know, Egypt has a shared border with Gaza, the Rafah border crossing. Egypt is a sovereign nation, and it can make its own decisions. We said that we will not prevent such aid as long as it doesn't end up in the hands of Hamas. And one more thing that I'd like to ask your viewers to maybe address. This is an important question. How come Gaza is allegedly running out of everything right now? Water, food, medical supplies, but not missiles, but not ammunition. This is why we want to make sure that nothing will end up in the hands of Hamas.
Tal, if I could ask you, please, because you did mention the fact that you said we will let aid in as long as it doesn't get to Hamas. How can you enforce that?
That is a question to the military generals and everyone in the country, in the IDF, who is tracking all the movements in Gaza. And trust me, we are doing just that because we're operating there, and we will further operate to make sure that we will dismantle Hamas, we will dismantle their military capabilities, and we'll make sure that by the end of this operation, they will lack the motivation to ever hurt us again as they did. Nobody in this country will never forget what they did to us on the October 7th massacre. We didn't want this war, Angela. As you know, we didn't even expect this. We were dragged into this by Hamas, and they are risking everyone's lives, not only Israeli lives, but also Palestinian lives in the Gaza Strip when they decided to come out of it and butcher our population.
The UN Secretary spoke at the Rafah crossing today. He's calling for a humanitarian ceasefire to allow the delivery of aid, given the desperate situation in Gaza right now. Give us Israel's position on that, if you would.
So we are not going to be restrained by anyone right now because we have a clear goal for this operation. We want to dismantle Hamas, and calls for a ceasefire right now are serving Hamas's strategy. So that's not a question right now, because calling for a ceasefire is basically saying that Hamas can get away with what they did, with the torturing, with the butchering of 1,400 Israelis, with taking out of eyes, chopping of fingers, killing children in front of their parents in front of their children. Do you know we have between 100 and 200 Israelis who are still unaccounted for after 14 days, which means that we don't know if they are dead inside Gaza.
We absolutely
or if they
understand
were abducted by...
that the situation is desperate on both sides. But of course, the Israeli government has made very clear that its enemy is Hamas and not the Palestinian people. And we all know that it is a desperate humanitarian situation inside Gaza right now. I wanted to ask you, on Wednesday, Israel announced the creation of a humanitarian zone for civilians in Gaza and West Khan Younis. Can you explain to us how that will be implemented?
So as we heard in the report that you just played before of your reporter, the heavy fighting will take place in the north. So this is why we asked the civilian population in northern Gaza to evacuate from these areas, because we know that they're hiding underneath, buildings, youth centers, schools, hospitals, and whatnot. And we will target and we'll reach each and every one of these murderous terrorists who conducted the October 7th massacre. So this is why we gave them more than 24 hours, almost 2 days of a prior notice to evacuate and move to safer havens in the south through designated routes that the IDF has designated for them to evacuate, because we don't want civilians in harm's way. We do not want civilians to get caught in the crossfire. Hamas are the ones using them as human shields when they're alive. And when they're dead, Hamas is using them as cannon fodder for their own propaganda.
And yet, of course, we are aware that there were many civilians who were not able to evacuate, who were not able to get out. And, of course, there have been rockets landing both in the north and in the south. I wanted to come back to your statement. Israel's made very clear it has vowed to eliminate Hamas. Can you explain exactly what that means and how you will determine that goal has been achieved?
Well, our military, high levels and our officials will determine that our goal has been achieved once Hamas will neither have the military capabilities to ever hurt us again as they did, and also, they will not have the motivation to hurt us as they did. We will eliminate their governing body, but also their military wing. Angela, but what is going to be more difficult to address, and that will be stage 2 of this war, is the ideology of Hamas. Because as we know, unfortunately, the Hamas ideology, which is very clear, it is stated in their charter, and it calls for the murder of the Jewish people, and it calls to obliterate the Jewish state.
On a practical level, I mean, we know senior Hamas leaders live outside of Gaza in places like Qatar or Turkey. I mean, how is this possible? How do you plan to deal with them, for example?
Well, I have no comment on this question. I'm not going to divulge any military strategy or, operational strategy moving ahead. That is all I can say in that respect.
The US President Joe Biden has warned Israel not to repeat the mistakes made by the US after 9/11. Can I ask you, has Israel considered, I mean, if it does launch a ground offensive in Gaza, it will face the prospect potentially of a war that will be drawn out, that it may not be able to win. And what about the risk of wider regional war?
So there are contingency plans, and we are discussing them not only among ourselves, but also with our American counterparts and international partners. That's all I can say, again, in that respect. But we will change the reality in Gaza, and we will make sure that we no longer live side by side with this monstrous threat, because the Israeli nation can just not allow it. We need to secure the safety of our people. And what happened on October 7th can never repeat again, never repeat again.
Again, Israel has said that it will not target civilians. But, of course, the operation to eliminate Hamas, as you've stated, it is a complicated one. It is almost certain to involve high civilian casualties. And Palestinians and governments around the world will blame Israel for that, not Hamas. I mean, do you see this affecting Israel's future security?
Well, Angela, you see in every war since the dawn of history, even in very justified wars like this one that we didn't start, we didn't want, it was forced upon us. We were dragged to it by Hamas when they butchered us. In every war, there are civilian casualties. Unfortunately, Israel doesn't want them. We don't want civilians in harm's way. We do not target civilians. But we will do whatever it takes to make sure that we will dismantle Hamas.
Israel's defense minister said today that after Israel eliminates Hamas, it aims to establish a new security regime in Gaza. Can I ask you what that would look like?
Well, there are different contingency plans for the day after, but we're not there yet. Again, our military is operating, and we will further operate. We're ready to act on every front if needed. To make sure that the Israeli public is safe. What we experienced here can never repeat. It can never repeat. Our population is in deep pain right now, but our resolve is clear. We're very resilient and very determined, very united in this fight together. We didn't want it, but we will win it.
It's, of course, very clear that the job of the Israeli government is to keep its citizens safe. Gallant also said that a goal of the Gaza campaign is to remove Israel's responsibility for life in Gaza. Can you help us understand what that means? Who will be responsible? Because, again, keeping people safe means, of course, planning for the future.
These are the kinds of questions and discussions that are being discussed right now. Again, not just our government among itself and our war cabinet, but also with international partners, including with the United States, that we're very, very grateful for, any kind of international support that we're getting, moral and material support. But these are the kind of discussions that are taking place, but that's not the right time to discuss them right now, because we are still in stage one, because we have to make sure that first we'll dismantle Hamas, and after that, I will have better answers to your questions. All different avenues are being examined right now. We address Gaza as the new ISIS caliphate, if you will. And Secretary Austin was here, and President Biden was here. All of Schultz, the chancellor, was here. He said that Hamas are the new Nazis. Hamas is even worse than ISIS. Hamas is even worse than ISIS. Let me just, address this point. First, because they have a state sponsor behind them, that's Iran, but also based on the atrocities that they committed. I don't personally, and maybe I'm wrong, but correct me, I don't remember ISIS taking out the eyes of children and butchering them in front of their parents and so on.
We of course understand Israel's anger, and of course there are two sides here, and regional powers have been very quick to condemn Israel.
There are not two sides here. I'm sorry, Angela. There's no both sidism here. No, it just simply doesn't fit. There's a Jewish and democratic state. There's a Jewish and democratic state on one end, and there's a terror organization that has turned Gaza into a terror base. It is an ISIS caliphate.
The fact is,
just like with ISIS, just after September 11, just like Pearl Harbor, there was no both sides. We can't address Israel with this double standard. I'm sorry, it doesn't fit here.
That regional powers, your neighbours, have been quick to condemn Israel for its response to the Hamas terrorist attack. My question is Israel completely isolated in the Middle East now? And what does that mean for Israel, regardless of what your plans are going forward?
Oh, Israel is not isolated in the Middle East, and that is a great question. We have the Abraham Accords in place, and our partners in the world, but also across the region, know that when Israel is strong and Israel wins, and when Israel will deal such a major blow to Hamas, they know that we also serve their interests. They know, they might not say it out publicly, but we are getting very, very supportive messages from not just in the region, by the way, from the international community. It's very heartwarming, and we're very, very grateful to that, because so many around the world are acknowledging that Israel has the right to defend itself after the October 7th massacre. Full stop. Full stop.
I did want to ask you, Iran and Saudi Arabia have been holding talks about the situation in Gaza. Can you tell me how Israel's government views those talks?
Well, if Iran and Saudi Arabia are talking, I'm not going to comment about talks between them. All I can say is that, as we know, Iran is behind Hamas. They are providing over 93% of Hamas's budget. They're behind Hezbollah, and they're 100% behind the Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza, which is the second largest terrorist organization there. So Iran's weaponry has been caught within Israeli territory after the October 7th massacre. And as you know, you're in Europe. I shouldn't be the one telling you that Iran's weaponry is also playing a significant part in the war in Ukraine. So that's the snake's head, if you will.
Tal Heinrich, spokesperson for the Israeli Prime Minister's office. Thank you so much for your time today.